Mitford, Tales of Old Japan, Chapter 17, The Misfortunes and Death of the Farmer Sōgorō. Incidents which, spite of the supernatural manifestations that are said to have attended them and may provoke a smile, are facts of historic notoriety familiar to every Japanese, furnish a forcible illustration of the relations between tenant and lord of the soil, and of the boundless power, whether for good or for evil, which the latter wields. It is remarkable that, in a land where the peasant, ranked next after the soldier and above the artisan and merchant in the fourfold social order, enjoys considerable respect, and where the law protects agriculture from encroachment, even permitting the pruning of overhanging boughs and the felling of hedgerow trees, the lord of the manor should still be left practically unchecked in his dealings with his tenants. The land tax, or more strictly, the annual rent paid by tenants, is commonly assessed at 40% of the crop. Yet there is no fixed principle clearly defining it, and oftentimes the landowner and cultivator divide the harvest produce in equal shares. Rice land is divided into 3 classes. According to this grading, it is calculated that 800 square feet of the best ground should yield to the owner 5 bags of rice annually. Each bag contains 4 toe, a toe being rather less than half an imperial bushel. And at present, 1,868 is worth 3 ryos, or about 16 shillings. Land of the middle quality should return 3 or 4 bags. The rent is paid either in rice or in money, depending on the grain current price, which fluctuates considerably. It becomes due in the 11th month of the year, after the harvests have been gathered and their market value determined. Rent on land sown with crops other than rice, cotton, beans, roots, and the like is payable in money in the 12th month. The tenant apparently retains the choice of which crops to cultivate. When pressed by poverty, the Japanese landlord does not confine himself to raising his legal rents. He can always exact from his needy tenants the advance of a year rent, or the loan of such sums as he requires to meet immediate wants. If the lord be just, the peasant is repaid in installments, with interest spread over 10 or 20 years. Too often, however, unjust and merciless proprietors fail to repay these advances, and instead press for yet further sums. It is then that the farmers, clad in their grass rain, coats and bearing sickles and bamboo poles, assemble before the gate of their lord palace at the capital to state their grievances, imploring the intercession of retainers and even of any women who may happen to go forth. Sometimes they pay for their temerity with their lives. Still, at least they have the satisfaction of bringing shame upon their persecutor in the eyes of his neighbors and the populace. Official reports of recent travels in the interior of Japan have fully demonstrated the hard lot to which the peasantry were subjected during the tycoon's government, and especially under the Hatamotos, the dynasty-created nobility. In one province, where village mayors appear to have abetted their lord extortions, they were forced to flee before an exasperated population who, seizing the opportunity of the revolution, laid waste and pillaged their houses, loudly praying for a fresh and just assessment of the land. While throughout the country the farmers hailed with acclamations the restoration of sovereign power to the Mikado and the abolition of the petty nobility that had fattened upon their dependents' misery. Warming themselves in the sunshine of the court at Yedo, the Hatamotos waxed fat and held high revel, caring little for who groaned or starved. Money must be found, and it was found. It is necessary, here, to add a word concerning the position of the village mayors, who play so important a part in this tale. The peasants of Japan are governed by 3 classes of officials: the nanashi, or mayor, the kumigashira, chiefs of companies, and the hyakushidai, or farmers' representatives. The village, governed by the nanashi, or mayor, is divided into companies of 5 families each, directed by a kumigashira. These companies are further subdivided into groups of 5 men who choose one of their number to represent them, in case they have any petition to present or affairs to settle with their superiors. That representative is the hyakushidai. The mayor, the company chief, and the representative keep registers of the families and persons under their charge, and are responsible for their good and orderly behavior. They pay taxes like other farmers, but receive a salary, the amount depending on the size and wealth of the village. 5% of the yearly land tax forms the mayor's salary, and each of the other officials receives 5% of the tax paid by the small bodies over which they preside. The average amount of land for one family to cultivate is about 1 cho, or 9 square yards. Yet there are farmers who have inherited as much as 5 or even 6 cho from their ancestors. There's also a class called, from their poverty, water-drinking farmers, who own no land of their own but hire that of those who possess more than they can cultivate. The rent thus paid varies, but good rice land may command as high a rent as from £1.18 to £2.6 per tan, 1/800 square feet. Farm laborers are paid from 6 or 7 rios a year up to as much as 30 rios, the rio being worth about 5s. 4D. Besides this, they are clothed and fed, not daintily perhaps, but sufficiently. The rice they cultivate is an almost unknown luxury to them. Millet is their staple food, and on high days and holidays they receive messes of barley or buckwheat. Where the mulberry tree is grown and the silkworm educated, the laborer obtains the highest wage. On good land, the rice crop should yield 12.5-fold, while on ordinary land from 6 to 7-fold only. Ordinary arable land is worth only half as much as rice land, which cannot be purchased for less than 40 rios per tan of 1/800 square feet. Common hill or woodland is cheaper still than arable land, but orchards and groves of the Polonia are worth from 50 to 60 rios per tan. With regard to the punishment of crucifixion, by which Sōgorō was executed, it is inflicted for the following offenses: parricide, including the murder or striking of parents, uncles, aunts, elder brothers, masters, or teachers, coining counterfeit money, and passing the barriers of the tycoon territory without a permit. The criminal is attached to an upright post furnished with 2 cross bars, his arms and feet fastened by ropes. He is then transfixed with spears by men of the Ada or pariah class. I once passed the execution, ground near Yedo, when a body was already attached to the cross. The dead man had murdered his employer, and though condemned to death by crucifixion, had died in prison before the sentence could be carried out. He had accordingly been packed in a squatting position in a huge red earthenware jar, which, after being tightly filled with salt, was hermetically sealed. On the anniversary of the crime, the jar was carried to the execution, ground and broken. The body was taken out and tied to the cross, its knees and arms having been cut at the joints to permit extension of the stiffened, shrunken limbs, then transfixed with spears and left exposed for 3 days. An open grave, the upturned earth of which seemed almost entirely composed of dead men remains, waited to receive the dishonored corpse, over which 3 or 4 Adas, squalid and degraded beings, mounted guard, smoking their pipes by a scanty charcoal fire and bandying obscene jests. It was a hideous and ghastly warning, had any cared to read its lesson. Yet passers, by on the high road, took little or no notice of the sight, and a group of chubby, happy children played not 10 yards from the dead body, as if nothing strange or uncanny were near them. The ghost of Sakura. How true is the principle laid down by Confucius, that the benevolence of princes is reflected in their country, while their wickedness breeds sedition and confusion. In the province of Shimosa, in the district of Soma, Hadakaga no Kami was lord of the castle of Sakura and head of a family that for generations had produced renowned warriors. When Kaga no Kami, who had served in the Gorojiu, the shogun cabinet, died at Sakura Castle, his eldest son Katsuke no Suke Masanabu inherited the estates and honors and was appointed to a seat in the Gorojiu. But he proved a different man from the lords who had preceded him. He treated the farmers and peasants unjustly, imposing additional and grievous taxes so that the tenants on his estates were driven to the utmost extremity of poverty. And although year after year, month after month, they prayed for mercy and remonstrated against this injustice, no heed was paid, and the people throughout the villages were reduced to the deepest distress. Accordingly, the chiefs of the 136 villages, producing a total revenue of 40 kokus of rice, assembled in council and unanimously resolved to present a petition to the government, sealed with their seals, stating that their repeated remonstrances had been disregarded by their local authorities. They then assembled in numbers before the house of one of their lord councillors, named Ikiura Kazuye, to show him the petition first, but even then no notice was taken of them. So they returned home and resolved, after consulting together, to proceed to their lord Yashiki, or palace at Yido, on the 7th day of the 10th month. It was determined with one accord that 143 village chiefs should go to Yido, and the chief of Iwahashi, one Sōgorō, a man of 48, noted for his ability and judgment, ruling a district producing 1,000 kokus, stepped forward and said, "This is by no means an easy matter, my masters. It certainly is of great importance that we should carry our complaint to our lord palace at Yido, but what are your plans? Have you any fixed intentions?" "It is, indeed, a most important matter," rejoined the others, but they had nothing further to add. Then Sōgorō went on to say, "We have appealed to the public office of our province, but to no avail. We have petitioned the prince councillors likewise in vain. I know that all that remains for us is to lay our case before our lord palace at Yido, and if we go there, it is equally certain that we shall not be heard. On the contrary, we shall be cast into prison. If we are not attended to here, in our own province, how much less will the officials at Yido concern themselves with our case? We might thrust our petition into the litter of one of the Gorōjiu in the public streets. But even then, as our lord is a member of the Gorōjiu, none of his peers would care to examine the rights and wrongs of our complaint for fear of offending him. And the man who presented the petition in such a desperate manner would lose his life on a bootless errand. If you have made up your minds to this, and are determined at all hazards to start, then go to Yido by all means, and bid a long farewell to parents, children, wives, and relations. This is my opinion." The others, all agreeing with Sōgorō, determined that, come what might, they would go to Yido, and they settled to assemble at the village of Funabashi on the 13th day of the 11th month. On the appointed day, all the village officers met at the place agreed upon, Sōgorō, chief of Iwahashi, alone being absent. And when on the following day Sōgorō had still not arrived, they deputed one of their number, named Rokurōbai, to inquire the reason. Rokurōbai arrived at Sōgorō house towards 4 in the afternoon, and found him quietly warming himself over his charcoal brazier, as if nothing had happened. The messenger, seeing this, said rather testily, "The chiefs of the villages are all assembled at Funabashi according to covenant, and as you, Master Sōgorō, have not arrived, I have come to inquire whether sickness or some other cause prevents you." "Indeed," replied Sōgorō, "I am sorry you should have had so much trouble. My intention was to have set out yesterday, but I was taken with a colic, with which I am often troubled, and, as you see, I am taking care of myself. So for a day or two I shall not be able to start. Pray be so good as to let the others know this." Rokurōbai, seeing that there was no help for it, returned to Funabashi and related to the others what had occurred. They were all indignant at what they regarded as the cowardly defection of a man who had spoken so fairly, but resolved that the conduct of one man should not influence the rest, and talked themselves into believing that the affair would be easily carried through. So they agreed to start and present the petition, and having arrived at Yido, put up in the street called Bakuracho. Yet although they tried to press their complaint upon their lord various officers, no one would listen. The doors were shut in their faces, and they had to return to their inn, crestfallen and unsuccessful. On the following day, the 18th, they all met at a tea house in an avenue before a shrine of Kwanon Sama, and having held a consultation, they determined that, As no good expedient had been found, they would again send for Sōgorō to see if he could devise a plan. Accordingly, on the 19th Rokuryobai and one Jiyaman started for Iwahashi at noon and arrived the same evening. Now the village chief Sōgorō, who had resolved that the presentation of this memorial was not to be treated lightly, summoned his wife, children, and relations, and said to them, "I am about to undertake a journey to Yedo for the following reasons. Our present lord of the soil has raised the land tax in rice and the other imposts more than tenfold, so that pen and paper would fail to convey the poverty to which the people are reduced, and the peasants are undergoing the tortures of hell upon earth. Seeing this, the chiefs of the various villages have presented petitions, but to what effect remains doubtful. My earnest desire, therefore, is to devise some means of deliverance from this cruel persecution. If my ambitious scheme fails, then I shall return home no more, and even if I gain my end, it is hard to say how I shall be treated by those in power. Let us take a cup of wine together, for it may be that you shall see my face no more. I give my life to allay the misery of the people of this estate. If I die, mourn not for my fate, weep not for me." Having spoken thus, he addressed his wife and his 4 children, instructing them carefully as to what he desired should be done after his death, and minutely stating every wish of his heart. Then, after drinking a parting cup with them, he cheerfully took leave of all present and went to a tea house in the neighboring village of Funabashi, where the 2 messengers, Rokuryobai and Jiyaman, were anxiously awaiting his arrival, so that they might recount to him all that had taken place at Yedo. "In short," said they, "it appears to us that we have failed completely, and we have come to meet you to learn what you propose. If you have any plan to suggest, we would fain be made acquainted with it." "Sirs," replied Sōgorō very quietly, "although we have found no better success here than at home, there is no use in grieving. In a day or 2, the Gorojiu will go to the castle. We must wait for this opportunity, and following one of the litters thrust in our memorial. This is my opinion. What think you, my masters?" One and all the assembled elders agreed as to the excellence of this advice. Having decided to act on it, they returned to their inn. Then Sōgorō held a secret consultation with Jiyaman, Hanzo, Rokuryobai, Chinzo, and Kenshiro, 5 of the elders, and with their assistance drew up the memorial. And having heard that on the 26th of the month, when the Gorojiu should go to the castle, Kyusei Yamato no Kami would proceed to a palace under the western enclosure, they kept watch in a place hard by. As soon as they saw the litter of the Gorojiu approach, they drew near it, and, having humbly stated their grievances, handed in the petition. And as it was accepted, the 6 elders were greatly elated and doubted not that their heart's desire would be attained. So they went off to a tea house at Ryogoku, and Jiyaman said, "We may congratulate ourselves on our success. We have handed in our petition to the Gorojiu, and now we may set our minds at rest. Before many days have passed, we shall hear good news from the rulers." To Master Sōgorō is due great praise for his exertions. Sōgorō, stepping forward, answered, "Although we have presented our memorial to the Gorojiu, the matter will not be so quickly decided. It is therefore useless that so many of us should remain here. Let 11 men stay with me, and let the rest return home to their several villages. If we who remain are accused of conspiracy and beheaded, let the others agree to reclaim and bury our corpses. As for the expenses we shall incur until our suit is concluded, let that be according to our original covenant. For the sake of the 136 villages we will lay down our lives, if need be, and submit to the disgrace of having our heads exposed as those of common malefactors." Then they had a parting feast together, and after a sad leave-taking, the main body of the elders returned to their country, while the others, wending their way to their quarters, waited patiently to be summoned to the Supreme Court. On the 2D day of the 12th month, Sōgorō, having received a summons from the residents of the Gorojiu Kyusei Yamato no Kami, proceeded to obey it and was ushered to the porch, where 2 counselors, named Ajima Gidyu and Yamaji Yori, met him and said, "Some days since you had the audacity to thrust a memorial into the litter of our Lord Yamato no Kami. By an extraordinary exercise of clemency, he is willing to pardon this heinous offense. But should you ever again endeavor to force your petitions upon him, you will be held guilty of riotous conduct." And with this they gave back the memorial. I humbly admit the justice of his lordship's censure. But, O my lords, this is no hasty nor ill-considered action. Year after year, affliction upon affliction has been heaped upon us, until at last the people are without even the necessaries of life. And we, seeing no end to the evil, have humbly presented this petition. I pray your lordships, in your great mercy, to consider our case and deign to receive our memorial. Vouchsafe to take such measures that the people may live, and our gratitude for your great kindness will know no bounds." "Your request is a just one," replied the two counselors after hearing him, "but your memorial cannot be received, so you must even take it back." With this they handed back the document and wrote down the names of Sōgorō and 6 of the elders who had accompanied him. There was no help for it. They must take back their petition and return to their inn. The 7 men, dispirited and sorrowful, sat with folded arms considering what was best to be done, what plan should be devised, until at last, when they were at their wits' end, Sōgorō said in a whisper, "So our petition, which we gave in after so much pains, has been returned after all. With what face can we return to our villages after such disgrace? I, for one, do not propose to waste my labor for nothing. Accordingly, I shall bide my time until some day when the shogun shall go forth from the castle, and lying in wait by the roadside, I shall make known our grievances to him, who is lord over our lord. This is our last chance." The others applauded this speech, and having with one accord hardened their hearts, waited for an opportunity. It so happened that on the 20th day of the 12th month, the shogun, Prince Iemitsu, was pleased to worship at the tombs of his ancestors at Yaino. And Sōgorō and the other elders, hearing this, regarded it as a special favor from the gods and felt certain that this time they would not fail. So they drew up a fresh memorial, and at the appointed time, Sōgorō hid himself beneath the Samye Bridge, in front of the Black Gate at Yaino. And although there were cries to arrest him, and he was buffeted by the escort, he crawled to the side of the litter, and the shogun accepted the document. But Sōgorō was arrested by the escort and thrown into prison. As for the memorial, His Highness ordered that it be handed to the Gorojiu Hata Katsuke no Suke, the lord of the petitioners. When Hata Katsuke no Suke returned home and read the memorial, he summoned his counselor Kajima Shikabu and said, "The officials of my estate are mere bunglers." When the peasants assembled and presented a petition, they refused to receive it and have thus brought this trouble upon me. Their folly has been beyond belief. However, it cannot be helped. We must remit all the new taxes, and you must inquire how much was paid to the former lord of the castle. As for this Sōgorō, he is not the only one at the bottom of the conspiracy. However, as this heinous offense of his lying in wait for the shogun procession is unpardonable, we must contrive to have him given up to us by the government, and as an example to the rest of my people, he shall be crucified, he and his wife and his children, and after his death all that he possesses shall be confiscated. The other 6 men shall be banished, and that will suffice. "My lord," replied Shikabu, prostrating himself, "your lordship intentions are just. Sōgorō, indeed, deserves any punishment for his outrageous crime. But I humbly venture to submit that his wife and children cannot be said to be guilty to the same degree. I implore your lordship mercifully to be pleased to absolve them from so severe a punishment. Where the sin of the father is great, the wife and children cannot be spared," replied Katsuke no Suke, and his counselor, seeing that his heart was hardened, was forced to obey without further remonstrance. So Katsuke no Suke, having obtained that Sōgorō should be delivered to him by the government, caused him to be brought to his Sakura estate as a criminal, in a litter covered with nets, and confined him in prison. When his case had been inquired into, a decree was issued by Lord Katsuke no Suke that he should be punished for a heinous crime. and on the 9th day of the 2D month of the 2nd year of the period, styled Shōhō, A.D. 1644, he was condemned to be crucified. Accordingly, Sōgorō, his wife and children, and the elders of the 136 villages were brought before the courthouse of Sakura, where 45 chief officers were assembled. The elders were then told that, yielding to their petition, their lord was graciously pleased to order that the oppressive taxes be remitted, and that the dues levied should not exceed those of former times. As for Sōgorō and his wife, the following sentence was passed upon them. Whereas you have set yourself up as the head of the villagers, whereas, secondly, you dared to make light of the government by petitioning His Highness the Shogun directly, thereby offering insult to your lord, and whereas, thirdly, you presented a memorial to the Goroju, and whereas, fourthly, you were privy to a conspiracy, for these 4 heinous crimes you are sentenced to death by crucifixion. Your wife is sentenced to die in like manner, and your children will be decapitated. This sentence is passed upon the following persons: Sōgorō, chief of the village of Iwahashi, aged 48. His wife, man, aged 38. His son, Genosuke, aged 13. His son, Sohei, aged 10. His son, Kahachi, aged 7. The eldest daughter of Sōgorō, named Hatsu, 19 years of age, was married to a man named Jiyamen in the village of Hakamura, in Shitachi, beyond the river, in the territory of Matsudera Matsu no Kami, the prince of Sendai. His second daughter, named Saki, 16, was married to one Tojiro, chief of a village on the property of my lord Nato Geki. No punishment was decreed against these 2 women. The 6 elders who had accompanied Sōgorō were told that, although by right they had merited death, yet by their lord's special clemency their lives would be spared, but they were condemned to banishment. Their wives and children would not be attainted, and their property would be spared. The 6 men were banished to Ashima, in the province of Aizu. Sōgorō received his sentence with pure courage. The 6 men were banished, but 3 of them were pardoned on the occasion of the death of the shogun, Prince Genuine, and returned to their country. In accordance with the above decision, the taxes were remitted. Men and women, young and old, rejoiced at the advantage gained for them by Sōgorō and the 6 elders, and there was not one who did not mourn their fate. When the officers of the several villages left the court house, one Zembe, chief of the village of Sakato, told the others that he had some important subjects to speak upon and begged them to meet him in the temple called Fukushoin. Every man consenting, and the 136 men assembled at the temple, Zembe addressed them as follows. The success of our petition, in obtaining the reduction of our taxes to the same amount as was levied by our former lord, is owing to Master Sōgorō, who has thus thrown away his life for us. He and his wife and children are now to suffer as criminals for the sake of the 136 villages. That such a thing should take place before our very eyes seems to me unbearable. What say you, my masters? Aye, what you say is just from top to bottom, replied the others. Then Hanziaman, elder of the village of Katsuta, stepped forward and said, As Master Zembe has just said, Sōgorō is condemned to die for a matter in which all the village elders are concerned to a man. We cannot look on unconcerned. Full well I know that our pleading for Sōgorō may be useless, but we may at least petition that the lives of his wife and children be spared. The assembled elders, having all applauded this speech, determined to draw up a memorial, and they resolved that, should their petition be refused by the local authorities, they would present it at their lord palace in Yedo, and should that fail, appeal to the government. Accordingly, before noon on the following day, they all affixed their seals to the memorial, which 4 of them, including Zembe and Hanziaman, composed as follows. With deep fear, we humbly venture to present the following petition, which the elders of the 136 villages of this estate have affixed with their seals. In consequence of the humble petition we lately offered, the taxes have graciously been reduced to the rates levied by the former lord of the estate, and new laws have been vouchsafed to us. With reverence and joy, the peasants, great and small, have gratefully acknowledged these favors. With regard to Sōgorō, the elder of Iwahashi, who ventured to petition His Highness the Shogun in person, thereby committing a heinous offense, he has been sentenced to death in the castle town. With fear and trembling, we recognize the justice of his sentence. But as for his wife and children, she is but a woman, and they so young and innocent that they cannot distinguish the east from the west. We pray that in your great clemency you will remit their sin and deliver them to the representatives of the 136 villages, for which we shall be ever grateful. We, the elders of the villages, know not to what extent we may be transgressing in presenting this memorial. We were all guilty of affixing our seals to the former petition, but Sōgorō, who was chief of a large district producing 1,000 kokus of revenue, and therefore a man of experience, acted for the others, and we grieve that he alone should suffer for all. Yet in his case, we reverently admit that there can be no reprieve. For his wife and children, however, we humbly implore your gracious mercy and consideration. Signed by the elders of the villages of the estate, the 2D year of Shōhō, and the 2D month. Having drawn up this memorial, the 136 elders with Zembei at their head proceeded to the court house to present the petition and found the various officers seated in solemn conclave. Then the clerk took the petition and, having opened it, read it aloud, and the counselor Ikiura Kazuye said, "The petition which you have addressed to us is worthy of all praise. But you must know that this matter is no longer within our control. The affair has been reported to the government, and although the priests of my lord ancestral temple have interceded for Sōgorō, my lord is so angry that he will not listen even to them, saying that had he not been one of the Goroju, he would have been in danger of being ruined by this man. His high station alone saved him. My lord spoke so severely that the priests themselves dare not recur to the subject. You see, therefore, that it will be of no use for you to attempt further steps in the matter, for most certainly your petition will not be received. You had better, then, think no more about it." And with these words he returned the memorial. Zembei and the elders, seeing to their infinite sorrow that their mission was fruitless, left the court house and sorrowfully took counsel together, grinding their teeth as they reflected on the counselor words about the futility of their attempt. As for Hijiro, he fell sick at the end of the 7th month, and on the 11th day of the 8th month died, being 47 years old that year. These 3 men, who had loved Sōgorō as fishes love water, were true to him to the last. Hijiro was buried on Mount Koya. Kakishin wandered through the country as a priest, praying for the entry of Sōgorō and his children into the perfection of paradise. And after visiting all the shrines and temples, he returned at last to his own province of Shimosa and took up his abode at the temple Ryukakuji, in the village of Kano in the district of Imban, praying and making offerings on behalf of the souls of Sōgorō, his wife and children. Hanzayeman, now known as the priest Zensho, remained at Shinagawa, a suburb of Yedo, and by the charity of good people collected enough money to erect 6 bronze Buddhas, which remain standing to this day. He fell sick and died at the age of 70, on the 10th day of the 2D month of the 13th year of the period, styled Kanban. Zembei, who as a priest had changed his name to Kakishin, died at the age of 76 on the 17th day of the 10th month of the 2D year of the period, styled Impo. Thus did those men, for the sake of Sōgorō and his family, give themselves up to works of devotion, and the other villagers also brought food to soothe the spirits of the dead and prayed for their entry into paradise. And as litanies were repeated without intermission, there can be no doubt that Sōgorō attained salvation. In paradise, where the blessings of God are bestowed without favor, the soul learns its faults by the measure of the rewards given. The lusts of the flesh are abandoned, and the soul, purified, attains to the glory of Buddha. On the 11th day of the 2D month of the 2D year of Shōho, Sōgorō having been convicted of a heinous crime, a scaffold was erected at Ueradai, and the counselor resident at Yido and the counselor resident on the estate, with the other officers, proceeded to the place in all solemnity. Then the priests of Tokoji, in the village of Sakinaga, followed by coffin bearers, took their places before the counselors and said, "We humbly beg leave to present a petition. What have your reverences to say?" "We are men who have forsaken the world and entered the priesthood," answered the monks respectfully. "And we would fain, if it be possible, receive the bodies of those who are to die, that we may bury them decently." At the hour of the snake, 10 a.m., the appointed hour for the execution, people from the neighboring villages and the castle town, old and young, men and women, flocked to see the sight. Many came also to bid a last farewell to Sōgorō, his wife and children, and to offer a prayer for them. When the hour arrived, the condemned were dragged forth bound and made to sit upon coarse mats. Sōgorō and his wife closed their eyes, for the sight was more than they could bear, and the spectators, with heaving breasts and streaming eyes, cried cruel and pitiless, and, taking sweetmeats and cakes from the bosoms of their dresses, threw them to the children. At noon precisely, Sōgorō and his wife were bound to the crosses, which were then set upright and fixed in the ground. When this had been done, their eldest son Gensuke was led forward to the scaffold before the two parents. Then Sōgorō cried out, "Oh, cruel, cruel! What crime has this poor child committed that he is treated thus? As for me, it matters not what becomes of me," and the tears ran down his face. The spectators prayed aloud and shut their eyes, and the executioner himself, standing behind the boy and saying that it was a pitiless thing the child should suffer for the father's fault, prayed silently. Then Gensuke, who had kept his eyes closed, said to his parents, "O my father and mother, I am going before you to paradise, that happy country, to wait for you. My little brothers and I will be on the banks of the river Sanzu, and shall stretch out our hands to help you across. Farewell, all you who have come to see us die, and now please cut off my head at once." With this he stretched out his neck, murmuring a last prayer, and not only Sōgorō and his wife, but even the executioner and the spectators could not repress their tears. But the headsman, unnerved and touched to the very heart, was forced, on account of his office, to cut off the child head, and a piteous wail arose from the parents and the spectators. Then the younger child Sohei said to the headsman, "Sir, I have a sore on my right shoulder. Please cut my head off from the left shoulder, lest you should hurt me." Alas, I know not how to die, nor what I should do. When the headsman and the officers present heard the child artless speech, they wept again for very pity, but there was no help for it, and the head fell off more swiftly than water is sucked up by sand. Then little Kahachi, the third son, who, on account of his tender years, should have been spared, was butchered as he sat in his simplicity, eating the sweetmeats thrown to him by the spectators. When the execution of the children was over, the priests of Tokoji took their corpses, and, having placed them in coffins, carried them away amidst the lamentations of the bystanders, and buried them with great solemnity. Then Shigeyaman, one of the servants of Danzayaman, the chief of the Edas, who had been engaged for the purpose, was just about to thrust his spear when, "Oh man," Sōgorō, wife, raising her voice, said, "Remember, my husband, that from the first you had made up your mind to this fate. What though our bodies be disgracefully exposed on these crosses? We have the promises of the gods before us, therefore mourn not. Let us fix our minds upon death. We are drawing near to paradise, and shall soon be with the saints. Be calm, my husband. Let us cheerfully lay down our single lives for the good of many. Man lives but for one generation, his name for many. A good name is more to be prized than life." So she spoke, and Sōgorō on the cross, laughing gaily, answered, "Well said, wife. What though we are punished for the many? Our petition was successful, and there is nothing left to wish for. Now I am happy, for I have attained my heart desire. The changes and chances of life are manifold, But if I had 500 lives, and could 500 times assume this shape of mine, I would die 500 times to avenge this iniquity. For myself, I care not, but that my wife and children should be punished also is too much. Pitiless and cruel. Let my Lord fence himself in with iron walls, yet shall my spirit burst through them and crush his bones as a return for this deed. And as he spoke, his eyes became vermilion red and flashed like the sun or the moon, and he looked like the demon Razetsu. Come, he shouted, make haste and pierce me with the spear. Your wishes shall be obeyed, said the Ada Shigeyaman, and thrust a spear into his right side until it came out at his left shoulder, and the blood streamed forth like a fountain. Then he pierced the wife from the left side, and she, opening her eyes, said in a dying voice, Farewell, all you who are present. May harm keep far from you. Farewell. Farewell. And as her voice waxed faint, the second spear was thrust in from her right side, and she breathed out her spirit. Sōgorō, the color of his face not even changing, showed no sign of fear, but opening his eyes wide, said, Listen, my masters, all you who have come to see this sight. Recollect that I shall pay my thanks to my lord Katsuke, no Suke, for this day work. You shall see it for yourselves, so that it shall be talked of for generations to come. As a sign, when I am dead my head shall turn and face towards the castle. When you see this, doubt not that my words will come true. When he had spoken thus, the officer directing the execution gave a sign to the Ada Shigeyaman and ordered him to finish, so that Sōgorō should speak no more. So Shigeyaman pierced him 12 or 13 times, until he died. And when he was dead, his head turned and faced the castle. When the two counselors beheld this miracle, they came down from their raised platform and knelt before Sōgorō's dead body, and said, Although you were but a peasant on this estate, you conceived a noble plan to succor the other farmers in their distress. You bruised your bones and crushed your heart for their sakes. Still, in that you appealed to the shogun in person, you committed a grievous crime and made light of your superiors. And for this, it was impossible not to punish you. Still, we admit that to include your wife and children in your punishment and kill them before your eyes was a cruel deed. What is done, and regret is of no avail. However, honors shall be paid to your spirit. You shall be canonized as the Saint Daimyo and placed among the tutelar deities of my lord family. With these words, the two counselors made repeated reverences before the corpse, and in this showed their faithfulness to their lord. But he, when the matter was reported, only laughed scornfully at the idea that the hatred of a peasant could affect his feudal lord. He said that a vassal who had dared to hatch a plot which, had it not been for his high office, would have ruined him, had met with his deserts. As for causing him to be canonized, let him be as he was. Seeing their lord anger, the counselors could only obey. But it was not long before he had cause to know that, though Sōgorō was dead, his vengeance was yet alive. The relations of Sōgorō and the village elders having been summoned to the court house, the following document was issued. Although the property of Sōgorō, the elder of the village of Iwahashi, is confiscated, his household furniture shall be made over to his 2 married daughters, and the village officials will see that these few poor things are not stolen by lawless and unprincipled men. His rice fields and corn fields, his mountain land and forest land will be sold by auction. His house and grounds will be given over to the elder of the village. The price fetched by his property will be paid over to the lord of the estate. The above decree will be published in full to the peasants of the village, and it is strictly forbidden to find fault with this decision. The 12th day of the 2D month of the 2D year of the period Shōho. The peasants, having heard this decree with all humility, left the courthouse. Then the following punishments were awarded to the officers of the castle, who, by rejecting the peasants' petition in the first instance, had brought trouble upon their lord. Dismissed from their office were the resident councillors at Yedo and at the castle town. Banished from the province were 4 district governors, 3 bailiffs, and 19 petty officers. Dismissed from office were 3 metsukes, or censors, and 7 magistrates. Condemned to hara, kiri was 1 district governor and 1 Yedo bailiff. The severity of this sentence was owing to the officials' injustice in raising new and unprecedented taxes, bringing affliction upon the people, and refusing to receive the peasants' petitions without consulting their lord, thus driving them to appeal to the shogun in person. In their avarice, they looked not to the future, but laid too heavy a burden on the peasants, so that the latter appealed to a higher power, endangering the honor of their lord house. For this bad government, the various officials are to be punished as above. Thus was justice carried out at the palace at Yedo and at the court house at home. But in the history of the world, from the Dark Ages down to the present time, there are few instances of one man laying down his life for the many as Sōgorō did. Noble and peasant praise him alike. As months passed, toward the 4th year of the period Shōho, the wife of my lord Katsuke no Suke, being with child, was seized with violent pains. Retainers were sent to the various temples and shrines to pray by proxy, but all to no purpose. She continued to suffer as before. Towards the end of the 7th month, there appeared every night a preternatural light above the lady chamber. This was accompanied by hideous sounds, as of many people laughing fiendishly, and sometimes by piteous wailings as though myriads were lamenting. The profound distress caused by this added to her sufferings, so her privy counselor, an old man, took his place in the adjoining chamber and kept watch. All of a sudden he heard a noise as if a number of people were walking on the boards of the roof of my lady room, then a sound of men and women weeping. And when, thunderstruck, the counselor wondered what it could all be, there came a wild burst of laughter and all was silent. Early the following morning, the old women who had charge of my lady household presented themselves before my lord Katsuke no Suke and said, "Since the middle of last month, the waiting women have been complaining to us of the ghostly noises by which my lady is nightly disturbed, and they say that they cannot continue to serve her. We have tried to soothe them by saying that the devils should be exorcised at once, and that there is nothing to be afraid of. Still we feel that their fears are not without reason, and that they really cannot do their work, so we beg that your lordship will take the matter into consideration. This is a passing strange story of yours. However, I will go myself tonight to my lady apartments and keep watch. You can come with me." Accordingly, that night my lord Katsuke no Suke sat up in person. At the hour of the rat, midnight, a fearful noise of voices was heard, and Sōgorō and his wife, bound to the fatal crosses, suddenly appeared, and the ghosts, seizing the lady by the hand, said, "We have come to meet you. The pains you are suffering are terrible, but they are nothing in comparison with those of the hell to which we are about to lead you." At these words, Katsuke no Suke, seizing his sword, tried to sweep the ghosts away with a terrific cut, but a loud peal of laughter was heard, and the visions faded away. Katsuke no Suke, terrified, sent his retainers to the temples and shrines to pray that the demons might be cast out, but the noises were heard nightly as before. When the 11th month came round, the apparitions of human forms in my lady apartments became more frequent and more terrible, the spirits railing at her and howling out that they had come to fetch her. The women would scream and faint, and then the ghosts would disappear amid yells of laughter. Night after night this happened, and even by day the visions would manifest themselves, and my lady's sickness grew worse daily, until in the last month of the year she died of grief and terror. Then the ghost of Sōgorō and his crucified wife appeared day and night in Katsuke no Suke chamber, floating round the room and glaring at him with red and flaming eyes. The hair of the attendants would stand on end with terror, and if they tried to strike at the spirits, their limbs would be cramped, and their feet and hands would not obey their bidding. Katsuke no Suke would draw the sword that lay by his bedside, but as often as he did so, the ghosts faded away only to reappear in a more hideous shape than before, until at last Having exhausted his strength and spirits, even he became terror-stricken. The whole household was thrown into confusion, and day after day mystic rites and incantations were performed by the priests over braziers of charcoal, while prayers were recited without ceasing. But the visions only became more frequent, and there was no sign of their ceasing. After the 5th year of Shōho, the style of the years was changed to Keian. And during the 1st year of Keian, the spirits continued to haunt the palace, now appearing in the chamber of Katsuke no Suke, eldest son, and surrounding themselves with even more terrors than before. And when Katsuke no Suke was about to go to the shogun castle, they were seen howling their cries of vengeance in the porch of the house. At last, the relations of the family and members of the household took counsel together and told Katsuke no Suke that without doubt, no ordinary means would suffice to lay the ghosts. A shrine must be erected to Sōgorō and divine honors paid to him, after which the apparitions would assuredly cease. Katsuke no Suke, having carefully considered the matter and given his consent, had Sōgorō canonized under the name of Sogo Daimyo and a shrine erected in his honor. After divine honors had been paid to him, the awful visions were no more seen, and the ghost of Sōgorō was laid forever. In the 2D year of the period Keian, on the 11th day of the 10th month, on the occasion of the festival of first lighting the hearth, fire, the various daimyos and hatamotos of distinction went to the shogun castle at Yedo to offer their congratulations. During the ceremonies, my lord Hata Katsuke no Suke and Sakai Iwami no Kami, lord of Matsumoto Castle in the province of Shinshiu, had a quarrel whose origin was not made public. Sakai Iwami no Kami, though of a brave and noble family, received so severe a wound that he died on the following day at the age of 43. And as a consequence, his family was ruined and disgraced. My lord Katsuke no Suke, by great fortune, contrived to escape from the castle and took refuge in his own house whence, mounting a famous horse called Hira Abumi, he fled to his castle of Sakura in Shimosa, accomplishing the distance, about 60 miles in 6 hours. When he arrived before the castle, he called loudly to the guard within to open the gate, answering, in reply to their challenge, that he was Katsuke no Suke, the lord of the castle. The guard, not believing their ears, sent word to the counselor in charge of the castle, who rushed out to see if the person demanding admittance were really their lord. When he saw Katsuke no Suke, he caused the gates to be opened, and finding the sight more than strange, said, "Is this indeed you, my lord? What strange chance brings your lordship hither so late at night on horseback and alone, without a single follower?" With these words he ushered in Katsuke no Suke, who, in reply to the anxious inquiries of his people as to the cause of his sudden appearance, said, "You may well be astonished. I had a quarrel day in the castle at Yedo with Sakai Iwami no Kami, the lord of Matsumoto Castle, and I cut him down. I shall soon be pursued, so we must strengthen the fortress and prepare for an attack." The household, hearing this, were greatly alarmed, and the whole castle was thrown into confusion. Meanwhile, the people at Katsuke no Suke Palace at Yedo, not knowing whether their lord had fled, were in the greatest anxiety until a messenger came from Sakura and reported his arrival there. When the quarrel inside Yedo Castle and Katsuke no Suke flight had been taken cognizance of, he was attainted of treason, and soldiers were sent to seize him, dead or alive. Midzuno Setsu no Kami and Godo Yamato no Kami were charged with executing the order, and sallied forth on the 13th day of the 10th month to carry it out. When they arrived at the town of Sasai, they sent a herald with the following message: "Whereas Katsuke no Suke killed Sakai Iwami no Kami inside Yedo Castle and has fled to his own castle without leave, he is attainted of treason, and we, being connected with him by ties of blood and friendship, have been charged to seize him." The herald delivered this message to the counselor of Katsuke no Suke, who, pleading as an excuse that his lord was mad, begged the two nobles to intercede. Godo Yamato no Kami thereupon called the counselor to him and spoke privately to him, after which the latter took his leave and returned to Sakura Castle. Meanwhile, after consultation at Yedo, it was decided that, as Godo Yamato no Kami and Midzuno Setsu no Kami were related to Katsuke no Suke and might meet with difficulties for that reason, 2 other nobles, Ogasawara Iki no Kami and Nagahida no Kami, should be sent to assist them, with orders that should any trouble arise they should report immediately to Yedo. In consequence of this order, the 2 nobles with 5,000 men were about to march for Sakura on the 15th of the month, when a messenger arrived from that place, bearing the following dispatch for the Gorōjū from the 2 nobles who had preceded them. In obedience to the orders of His Highness the Shogun, we proceeded on the 13th day of this month to Sakura Castle and conducted a thorough investigation of the affair. It is true that Katsuke no Suke has been guilty of treason, but he is out of his mind. His retainers have called in physicians, and he is undergoing treatment by which his senses are gradually restored and his mind awakened from its sleep. At the time when he slew Sakai Iwami no Kami, he was not accountable for his actions and will be sincerely penitent when he is made aware of his crime. We have taken him prisoner and have the honor to await your instructions. In the meanwhile, we beg by these presents to let you know what we have done. Signed, Godo Yamato no Kami. Emidizuno, Esitsu no Kami. For this heinous crime and disregard of the sanctity of the castle, it is ordered that Katsuke no Suke be brought as a prisoner to Yedo in a litter covered with nets that his case may be judged. 2D year of Keian, 2D month. Signed by the Gorōjū, Inaba Mino no Kami. Inoue, Kawchichi no Kami. Kato Ecchiu no Kami. Upon receipt of this dispatch, Hata Katsuke no Suke was immediately placed in a litter covered with a net of green silk and conveyed to Yedo, strictly guarded by the retainers of the 2 nobles. And having arrived at the capital, he was handed over to the charge of a Kimoto Tajima no Kami. All his retainers were quietly dispersed, and his empty castle was ordered to be thrown open and given in charge to Midzuno Iki no Kami. At last, Katsuke no Suke began to feel that the death of his wife and his own misfortunes were just retribution for the death of Sōgorō and his wife and children, and he seemed awakened from a dream. Then night and morning, in his repentance, he offered up prayers to the sainted spirit of the dead farmer and acknowledged and bewailed his crime, vowing that if his family were spared from ruin and re-established, intercession should be made at the Mikado court at Kyoto on behalf of Sōgorō's spirit so that, being worshipped with even greater honors than before, his name should be handed down to all generations. In consequence of this, it happened that the spirit of Sōgorō, having relaxed in its vindictiveness, and ceased to persecute the Hata house. In the first month of the 4th year of Keian Katsuke no Suke received a summons from the shogun, and having been forgiven, was made lord of Matsuyama Castle in the province of Dewa with a revenue of 20,000 kokus. In the same year, on the 20th day of the 4th month, the shogun, Prince Iemitsu, departed this life at the age of 48. And whether by the prince forgiving spirit or by the divine interposition of the sainted Sōgorō, Katsuke no Suke was promoted to Utsunomiya Castle in Shimizuke with a revenue of 80,000 kokus. His name was changed to Hatahida no Kami. He also recovered his original Sakura Castle with a revenue of 20,000 kokus, so there can be no doubt that the saint befriended him. In return for these favors, the shrine of Sōgorō was made as beautiful as a gem. It is needless to say how many peasants of the estate flocked to the shrine. Any good luck that befell the people was ascribed to it, and night and day the devout worshipped there. Here follows a copy of the petition which Sōgorō presented to the shogun. We, the elders of the 136 villages of the district of Chiba in the province of Shimosa, and of the district of Byuji in the province of Kadzusa, most reverently offer up this our humble petition. When our former lord, Doi Shosho, was transferred to another castle in the 9th year of the period Kanie, Hatakaga no Kami became lord of Sakura Castle. And in the 17th year of the same period, my lord Katsuke no Suke succeeded him. Since that time, the taxes laid upon us have been raised in the proportion of 1 to and 2 sho to each koku. Item: at present taxes are raised on 19 of our articles of produce, whereas our former lord required only that we should furnish him with pulse and sesamum, for which he paid in rice. Item: not only are we not paid now for our produce, but if it is not given into the day, we are driven and goaded by the officials, and if there be further delay, we are manacled and severely reprimanded, so that if our own crops fail, we must buy produce from other districts and are pushed to the utmost extremity of affliction. Item: we have over and over again prayed to be relieved from these burdens, but our petitions are not received. The people are reduced to poverty, so that it is hard for them to live under such grievous taxation. Often they have tried to sell the land which they till, but none can be found to buy. So they have sometimes given over their land to the village authorities and fled with their wives to other provinces, and 730 men or more have been reduced to begging. 185 houses have fallen into ruins. Land producing 7,000 kokus has been given up and remains untilled, and 11 temples have fallen into decay in consequence of the ruin of those upon whom they depended. Besides this, the poverty-stricken farmers and women, having been obliged to take refuge in other provinces and having no abiding place, have been driven to evil courses and bring men to speak ill of their lord. And the village officials, being unable to keep order, are blamed and reproved. No attention has been paid to our repeated representations on this point, so we were driven to petition the Goro-jiu-kyūzei Yamato no Kami as he passed to the castle, but our petition was returned. And now, as a last resource, we tremblingly venture to approach His Highness the Shogun in person. The first year of the period Shoho, 12th month, 20th day. The seals of the elders of the 136 villages. The shogun at that time was Prince Iemitsu, the grandson of Ieyasu. He received the name of Dai-yu in after his death. The Goroju at that time were Hata Katsuke no Suke, Sakai Iwami no Kami, Inabamino no Kami, Kato Ekyu no Kami, and Inaye Kawachi no Kami. The Wakadashiori, or 2D Council, were Torie Wakasa no Kami, Tsuchiya Dua no Kami, and Itakura Nazen no Sho. A belief in ghosts appears as universal as belief in the immortality of the soul upon which it depends. Both in China and Japan, the departed spirit is believed to be vested with the power of revisiting the earth, and, in visible form, tormenting its enemies and haunting the places where the perishable part of it mourned and suffered. Haunted houses are slow to find tenants, for ghosts almost always come with revengeful intent. Indeed, the owners of such houses will sometimes pay men to live in them, such is the dread they inspire and the anxiety to blot out the stigma. One cold winter night at Yedo, as I was sitting with a few Japanese friends huddled round the imperfect heat of a charcoal brazier, the conversation turned upon the story of Sōgorō and on ghostly apparitions in general. Many a weird tale was told that evening, and I noted down the 3 or 4 which follow, for the truth of which the narrators vouched with the utmost confidence. About 10 years ago, there lived a fishmonger named Zenroku in Mikawa, street at Kanda, in Yedo. He was a poor man, living with his wife and 1 little boy. His wife fell sick and died, so he engaged an old woman to look after his boy while he went out to sell his fish. It happened one day that he and the other hucksters of his guild were gambling. This coming to the ears of the authorities, they were all thrown into prison. Although their offense was in itself a light one, they were kept for some time in durance while the matter was investigated. And Zenroku, owing to the damp and foul air of the prison, fell sick with fever. His little child, in the meantime, had been handed over by the authorities to the petty officers of the ward to which his father belonged, and was being well cared for Zenroku was known to be an honest fellow, and his fate excited much compassion. One night Zenroku, pale and emaciated, entered the house in which his boy was living, and all the people joyfully congratulated him on his escape from jail. "Why, we heard you were sick in prison." This is indeed a joyful return. Then Zenroku thanked those who had taken care of the child, saying he had returned secretly by the favor of his jailers that night, but that on the following day his offense would be remitted and he should be able to take possession of his house openly. For that night, he must return to prison. With this, he begged those present to continue their good offices to his babe, and, with a sad and reluctant expression, he left the house. On the following day, the officers of that ward were sent for by the prison authorities. They supposed they were summoned so that Zenroku might be handed back to them a free man, as he himself had said. But to their surprise, they were told that he had died the night before in prison and were ordered to carry away his dead body for burial. Then they knew that they had seen Zenroku ghost, and that when he said he should be returned to them on the morrow, he had alluded to his corpse. So they buried him decently and brought up his son, who is alive to this day. The next story was told by a professor at the college in Yedo, and although it is not as modern as the last, he stated it to be well authenticated and of general notoriety. About 200 years ago, there was a chief of the police named Aoyama Shiuzen who lived in Bancho Street at Yedo. His duty was to detect thieves and incendiaries. He was a cruel and violent man, without heart or compassion, who thought nothing of killing or torturing a man to gratify spite or revenge. This Shiuzen had in his house a servant, maid called Okiku, the chrysanthemum, who had lived in the family since childhood and was well acquainted with her master temper. One day, Okiku accidentally broke one of a set of 10 porcelain plates on which he set a high value. She knew she would suffer for her carelessness, but thinking that if she concealed the matter her punishment would be more severe, she went at once to her master wife and, in fear and trembling, confessed what she had done. When Shiuzen came home and heard that one of his favorite plates was broken, he flew into a violent rage and took the girl to a cupboard where he left her bound with cords, and every day cut off one of her fingers. Okiku, tightly bound and in agony, could not move. But at last she contrived to bite or cut the ropes asunder, and escaping into the garden, threw herself into a well and was drowned. From that time forth every night a voice was heard coming from the well, counting 1, 2, 3, and so on up to 9, the number of plates that remained unbroken. And then, when the 10th plate should have been counted, there came a burst of lamentation. The servants of the house, terrified at this, all left their master's service until Shiuzen, with not a single retainer left, was unable to perform his public duties. And when the government officers heard of this, he was dismissed from his office. At this time, there was a famous priest called Mikidzuki Shonin of the temple Denzuin, who, having been told of the affair, came one night to the house, and when the ghost began to count the plates, reproved the spirit, and by his prayers and admonitions caused it to cease troubling the living. The laying of disturbed spirits appears to form one of the regular functions of Buddhist priests. At least, we find them playing a conspicuous part in almost every ghost story. About 30 years ago, there stood a house at Mitsume, in the Honjo of Yedo, which was said to be nightly visited by ghosts so that no man dared to live in it, and it remained untenanted on that account. However, a man called Miura Takeshi, a native of the province of Ashio, who had come to Yedo to set up as a fencing master but was too poor to hire a house, heard of the haunted house for which no tenant could be found, and that the owner would let any man live in it rent-free. He said he feared neither man nor devil and obtained leave to occupy the house. So he hired a fencing room in which he gave his lessons by day, and after midnight returned to the haunted house. One night his wife, who took charge of the house in his absence, was frightened by a fearful noise coming from a pond in the garden, and thinking that this must be the ghost she had heard so much about, covered her head with the bed, clothes, and remained breathless with terror. When her husband came home, she told him what had happened, and on the following night, he returned earlier than usual and waited for the ghostly noise. At the same time as before, a little after midnight, the same sound was heard, as though a gun had been fired inside the pond. Opening the shutters, he looked out and saw something like a black cloud floating on the water, and in the cloud, the form of a bald man. Thinking there must be some cause for this, he made careful inquiries and learned that the former tenant, some 10 years before, had borrowed money from a blind shampooer, and being unable to pay the debt, had murdered his creditor when he pressed him for his money and had thrown his head into the pond. The fencing master accordingly collected his pupils and emptied the pond and found a skull at the bottom. So he called in a priest and buried the skull in a temple, causing prayers to be offered up for the repose of the murdered man's soul. Thus the ghost was laid and appeared no more. Belief in curses hanging over families for generations is as common as belief in ghosts and supernatural apparitions. There is a strange story on this theme in the house of Asai, belonging to the Hatamoto class. The ancestor of the present representative, 6 generations ago, had a concubine who was in love with a man who frequented the house and wished in her heart to marry him. But being a virtuous woman, she never thought of doing any evil deed. The wife of my lord Asai, however, was jealous of the girl and persuaded her husband that his rival in affection had gone astray. When he heard this, he was very angry and beat her with a candlestick so that he put out her left eye. The girl, who had indignantly protested her innocence, finding herself so cruelly handled, pronounced a curse against the house, upon which her master, seizing the candlestick again, dashed out her brains and killed her. Shortly afterwards, my lord Asai lost his left eye, fell sick, and died. And from that time forth to this day, it is said that the representatives of the house have all lost their left eyes after the age of 40, and shortly afterwards have fallen sick and died at the same age as the cruel lord who killed his concubine. Mitford Tales of Old Japan, Chapter 18. How Tajima Shumé was tormented by a devil of his own creation. Once upon a time there was a certain Ronin, Tajima Shumé by name, an able and well-read man who, while traveling to see the world, journeyed up to Kyoto by the Takedo. One day, in the neighborhood of Nagoya in the province of Oeri, he encountered a wandering priest, and they fell into conversation. Discovering they were bound for the same destination, they agreed to travel together, beguiling the weary miles with pleasant talk on divers matters. And so, as intimacy grew, they spoke freely of their private affairs. The priest, placing full trust in his companion honor, disclosed the purpose of his journey. "For some time past," said he, "I have nursed a desire that has occupied all my thoughts. I am resolved to set up a molten image in honor of Buddha. For this end, I have wandered through many provinces gathering alms, and by what weary toil who can tell? We have at last collected 200 ounces of silver, enough, I hope, to cast a handsome bronze figure." What does the proverb say? "He who bears a jewel in his bosom bears poison." Hardly had the Ronin heard the priest's words than a wicked thought sprang up within him, and he reflected, "Man life, from the womb to the grave, is made up of good and of ill luck. Here am I, nearly 40, a wanderer without a calling or even hope of advancement in the world. True, it seems shameful. Yet if I could steal the money this priest boasts of, I might live at ease for the remainder of my days." And thus he began to consider how best to compass his purpose. But the priest, far from suspecting his companion designs, journeyed cheerfully on until they reached the town of Quana. Here an arm of the sea is crossed by ferry. Boats that put off once 20 or 30 passengers have gathered. In one of these, the 2 travelers embarked. About halfway across, the priest was suddenly seized with a necessity to go to the side. The Ronin, following and unseen by the others, tripped him and thrust him into the sea. When the boatmen and passengers heard the splash and saw the priest struggling, they were alarmed and strove to save him. But the wind was fair, and the boat ran swiftly beneath bellying sails, quickly leaving them a few hundred yards from the drowning man, who sank before the boat could be brought about to rescue him. When he saw this, the Ronin put on the utmost grief and dismay and told his fellow passengers, "This priest, whom we have just lost, was my cousin. He was bound for Kyoto to visit the shrine of his patron, and as I had business there likewise, we agreed to travel together. Now, alas, by this misfortune my cousin is dead, and I am left alone." He spoke so feelingly and wept so freely that the passengers believed him, pitied him, and sought to comfort him. Then the Ronin said to the boatmen, "We should, by rights, report this matter to the authorities. But as I am pressed for time, and the business might bring trouble upon yourselves, perhaps it is better to hush it up for the present. I will at once go on to Kyoto and inform my cousin patron, besides writing home concerning it. What think you, gentlemen?" he added, turning to the other travelers. They, of course, were only too glad to avoid any hindrance to their progress, and all with one voice agreed to the Ronin proposal. Thus the matter was settled. When at length they reached the shore, they left the boat, each man going his way. But the Ronin, exulting in his heart, took the wandering priest luggage and, adding it to his own, pursued his journey to Kyoto. On reaching the capital, the Ronin changed his name from Shumé to Tokubei, and abandoning his position as a samurai, turned merchant, trading with the dead man money. Fortune favoring his speculations, he began to amass great wealth and lived at ease, denying himself nothing. In due time he married, and his wife bore him a child. Thus the days and months wore on, until one fine summer night, some 3 years after the priest's death, Tokubei stepped out upon the veranda of his house to enjoy the cool air and the beauty of the moonlight. Feeling dull and lonely, he began musing upon many things, when suddenly the deed of murder and theft committed so long ago recurred vividly to his mind, and he thought to himself, "Here am I, grown rich and fat on the money I wantonly stole. Since then all has prospered with me, yet had I not been poor I should never have become assassin or thief. Woe betide me, what a pity that was." And as he revolved the matter in his mind, a sense of remorse stole over him, in spite of all he could do. While his conscience thus smote him, he suddenly, to his utter amazement, beheld the faint outline of a man standing near a fir tree in the garden. On looking more attentively, he perceived that the man's whole body was thin and worn, the eyes sunken and dim. In the poor ghost before him, he recognized the very priest whom he had thrown into the sea at Quana. Chilled with horror, he looked again and saw the priest smiling in scorn. He would have fled into the house, but the ghost stretched forth its withered arm and, clutching the back of his neck, scowled with a vindictive glare and a hideous ghastliness of mien, so unspeakably awful that an ordinary man would have swooned with fear. But Tokubei, tradesman though he was, had once been a soldier and was not easily daunted. So he shook off the ghost, leapt into the room for his dirk, and laid about him boldly enough. But strike as he might, the spirit, fading into air, eluded his blows and suddenly reappeared only to vanish again. And thenceforth Tokubei knew no rest, being haunted night and day. At length, undone by such ceaseless vexation, Tokubei fell ill and kept muttering, "Oh, misery, misery! The wandering priest is coming to torture me." Hearing his moans and the disturbance he caused, the people of the house fancied he was mad and called in a physician, who prescribed for him. But neither pill nor potion availed to cure Tokubei, whose strange frenzy soon became the talk of the whole neighborhood. Now it chanced that the story reached the ears of a certain wandering priest lodging in the next street. When he heard the particulars, this priest gravely shook his head as though he knew all about it, and sent a friend to Tokubei house with the message that a wandering priest dwelling hard by had heard of his illness, and however grievous, would undertake to heal it by his prayers. Tokubei wife, driven half mad by her husband's sickness, lost no time in sending for him and bringing him into the sick man room. But no sooner did Tokubei see the priest than he yelled out, "Help! Help! Here is the wandering priest, come to torment me again. Forgive, forgive." And hiding his head beneath the coverlet, he lay quivering all over. Then the priest turned all present from the room, put his mouth to the affrighted man ear, and whispered, 3 years ago, at the Kwana ferry, you flung me into the water. You remember it well." But Tokubei was struck dumb and could only quake with fear. "Happily," continued the priest, "I had learned to swim and to dive as a boy, so I reached the shore and after wandering through many provinces, succeeded in setting up a bronze figure to Buddha, thereby fulfilling the wish of my heart. On my journey homewards, I took lodging in the next street and there heard of your marvelous ailment. Thinking I might divine its cause, I came to see you, and am glad to find I was not mistaken. You have done a hateful deed, yet am I not a priest, and have I not forsaken the things of this world, and would it not ill become me to harbor malice? Therefore repent, and abandon your evil ways. To behold, you do so I should esteem the height of happiness. Fortune befriended me ever after, but the richer I grew, the more keenly I felt how wicked I had been, and the more I foresaw that my victim vengeance would someday overtake me. Haunted by this thought, I lost my nerve, till one night I beheld your spirit, and from that time forth fell ill. But how you managed to escape, and are still alive, is more than I can understand. A guilty man, said the priest with a smile, shudders at the rustling of the wind or the chattering of a stork beak. A murderer conscience preys upon his mind till he sees what is not. Poverty drives a man to crimes which in his wealth he repents. How true is the doctrine of Moshi, that the heart of man, pure by nature, is corrupted by circumstances. Thus he held forth, and Tokubei, who had long since repented of his crime, implored forgiveness and presented him with a large sum of money, saying, "Half of this is the amount I stole from you 3 years since. The other half I entreat you to accept as interest, or as a gift." The priest at first refused the money, but Tokubei insisted on his accepting it and did all he could to detain him, yet in vain. The priest went his way and bestowed the money upon the poor and needy. As for Tokubei himself, he soon shook off his disorder and thenceforward lived at peace with all men, revered both at home and abroad, and ever intent on good and charitable deeds.